Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, August the 6th, 2025. Today is the 80th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima. And, I can remember the 40th anniversary on August the 6th, 1985. And I was in London. And I remember that people were painting white silhouettes on the pavements, and they were sort of humanoid silhouettes. And that's a reminder, 1985 was still very much in the during the Cold War. People were still very afraid of a nuclear war, as they should have been. And the reason for the white silhouettes was, apparently in Hiroshima and I suppose Nagasaki as well, when someone was very close to the area of the explosion, there was nothing left of them. They were vaporized, except there was just a silhouette sort of on the ground on which they were standing. And so, August 6, 1985, that was 40 years ago. That was actually the halfway point between now and Hiroshima. So, time is flying, and it seems a long time ago. Something so modern, so high tech as an atomic bomb was so long ago. And as far as I'm concerned, the horoscope of the bombing of Hiroshima is the most beautiful chart. Of all the charts I've looked at, people, events, everything, Hiroshima is far and away the most beautiful and the most important chart. And it really cuts to what one is looking for in astrology, and why one studies astrology, why one practices astrology. What is it all about? Is it about predicting the future? Is it about knowing oneself? Or perhaps is it about something else? And that's what I want to also look at in this video, with reference to the Hiroshima the Hiroshima chart. But first of all, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Wednesday, August the 6th, 2025. So here it is. Don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. Top right, that is a photograph of the mushroom cloud over Hiroshima, which I will be talking about later in the video. So as far as what's happening today, we have the moon still in Capricorn at 12 degrees Capricorn, and so, we can say all the usual stuff about the moon being in this sign. When the moon is in Capricorn, we perhaps are thinking about ourselves more than usual and our own interests. And there is, absolutely nothing wrong with that. We can't sort of worry too much about other people, until we have sorted everything out from our own perspective. And it's not necessarily just about ourselves, it's about our family and other people close to us. So priorities matter with moon in Capricorn, and in particular material priorities. And the moon does make two opposition aspects. It makes an opposition to Venus and it makes an opposition to Jupiter. And you see the contrast there. I mean, Venus and Jupiter in Cancer, that's supposedly quite a warm, friendly place for Venus and Jupiter to be in. Venus and Jupiter is perceived as being a fortunate, Venus-Jupiter conjunction. It's seen to be a fortunate aspect. It's perhaps about caring. And so moon in Capricorn, there's a distinction here. What do? We perhaps can sympathize, we can empathize with Venus and Jupiter in Cancer, but still we've got to look after our own interests. Though maybe it's the signs that don't matter. The signs don't matter. When you've got moon opposition Venus, moon opposition Jupiter, you might say that there's a temptation to take things too far, especially on an emotional level. And aside from that, we have a decile between Venus and Uranus. Venus and Uranus are 36 degrees apart, 1/10 of the circle. So that may say something about style and the kind of style that we are trying to demonstrate. And we're struggling. We're trying very hard to create a particular style. It may not be immediately available, but if we work at it, it might feel rather fake, because style should be natural, but it never is. And so it might be worth the effort to really try to be someone different, or to not necessarily someone different, but to show a different side of yourself through perhaps what you wear, or how you present yourself. That's a way in which the Venus decile Uranus is working. And then Mars moves into Libra. Well, Mars moves into Libra today in the Americas. If you're in Europe, it will move into Libra very early this morning. So, for example, if you're in the UK, Mars moves into Libra at 0:23 tomorrow on Thursday. So that would mean that if you're in California, that would be 4:23 today. So Mars is changing sign, and I will certainly talk more about it tomorrow. But we have to remember that Mars is not just moving into Libra, but it's on the Aries point, or rather it's sort of opposition the Aries point. And Mars is a high energy planet. It's a malefic planet. It's to do with anger. It's to do with war. And so Mars on the Aries point is not necessarily a good thing. There are a lot of things to get annoyed about. And if we look at the world around us, it's absolutely possible that tension levels will start to increase. And overall, this is an indication that the problems are now starting. I mean, I said a few days ago, but that I think this week is going to be difficult, particularly the last part of the week. And you could say that it really kicks off with Mars moving into Libra. And of course, Mars moving into Libra, soon enough it will be opposition Saturn, and there are other things going on. And tomorrow is the halfway point between the solstice and the equinox. So you have this, if you have the sun at 0 degrees Cancer at the solstice, 0 degrees Libra at the equinox, and at 15 degrees Leo, it's halfway there. And that's something I will be talking about tomorrow. But the sun is getting quite close to the Aries point now. The sun is within less than a degree of that 135 degree aspect to 0 degrees Aries. And so what that means is that the sun is not just aspecting the Aries point, but it's also starting to aspect Mars. So we've got sun 45 degree aspect to Mars. That's coming up. So yes, tension levels are increasing. I think the easy part of the week is now drawing to a close, and from now on things do get rather tense. As I've said, I do think you could argue that, at least on paper, this week is the most difficult and tense week of the whole year, and it starts now, or certainly by tomorrow. And turning to the picture for Sydney, Australia, the moon is going to be earlier in the sign. Moon is going to be at 4 degrees Capricorn at noon in Sydney, and of course this is representative of Australia, New Zealand, East Asia. So the moon is earlier in the sign. I don't think there's a huge amount of difference between Australia and the Americas, or New Zealand and the Americas. I mean, the moon is still making a square to Saturn, so especially in the early part of the day, if you are in Australasia, then the moon is moon square Saturn, square Neptune, things might be a bit difficult. There could be some frustrations, and other people, may not always behave or do what you expect. But that's not surprising, is it? We are moving into sort of difficult times, aren't we? And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the sun at the center of the solar system. And so here is the heliocentric chart, and Mercury is making a square to Uranus. Mercury in 29 Aquarius, making a square to Uranus at 28 Taurus, and Mercury is also making a trine to Mars, but it's probably that square to Uranus that matters most. And you have to think about it. Mercury square Uranus at the same time as Mars is opposition the Aries point. That does stir things up, and it sort of adds to a fairly sort of tense atmosphere where a lot of us feel that we have to say something. Can we say something? I don't know. It depends on the situation. And also, on sort of a mental perspective, a lot of us might be quite agitated, and maybe there's a lot to be agitated about. So those are a few thoughts about the heliocentric view. Yes, Mercury is trine Mars. Mercury trine Mars does mean that if we make the decision to say something, we can make our feelings felt. People will listen to us, and we might also feel a sort of inner dynamism. We've got to do something. But I do think the emphasis perhaps is on the verbal, though we shouldn't forget that geocentrically Mars is very highlighted. It's really starting to be highlighted at the moment because it's so close to the Libra point. So now I want to switch to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Wednesday, August 6, 2025. Aries, you are quite ambitious at the moment. You want to leave your mark, and you want to be noticed. Not because you're into your own ego, or because you're attention seeking. It's because you genuinely feel that you have got something to contribute, and you're able to be quite sort of down to earth and materialistic and indeed matter of fact about things. You just know that there are some things that do need to be done, and at the same time you're able to show a degree of objectivity. You're not going to get totally obsessed about whether or not you're being paid enough attention, whether or not you're getting personal rewards for what you're doing. If everyone is prepared to cooperate, and if everyone is working towards the same goal, then quite possibly that's good enough for you. And I really don't think, Aries, that today is about getting attention for the sake of it. You want attention simply because you've got something useful to do. And so, that's great. It's kind of in accordance with your overall destiny. And so, there may be moments where things really start to move in a sort of a gradual but very solid kind of way. Though there may be a few distractions. The moon is making oppositions to Venus and Jupiter. And those distractions, it could come from things that are familiar. For example, your family or your home. And part of you, with moon opposition Venus and Jupiter, would prefer to just relax, to enjoy the creature comforts, just be yourself and not have to do anything. And you know you can't do it. You know that's not possible. But there is pressure, and some people may be trying to sort of knock you off your path. Could be your family. There's always better things that you could be doing, or certainly more comfortable things that you could be doing. But in the end, Aries, you will understand your own priorities. Now, one thing that might be having an influence on you is the fact that Mars is getting very, very close to the Aries point, or the opposition of the Aries point. In fact, Mars is getting ready to change signs. And if you are in the Americas, then today Mars moves out of Virgo and moves into Libra. And that is a big sign change. Not just because Mars into Libra, it's because Mars is just on that point. It's on that Aries point. And you could say that that is quite empowering. It does mean, Aries, that you can have an influence, an influence that goes beyond partners, close friends, may even go beyond your social life, may go beyond your immediate groupings, whether it's at work and your social life, whatever. It may have an almost sort of global level. Now that is of course an exaggeration. If you're not involved in politics, if you're not a world leader or a celebrity opinion former, it might seem absurd. But as far as is possible, given your circumstances, whatever your circumstances might be, you can make your voice heard. And so you have to think about that, and maybe there's some obligation there. You've got opinions, you've got feelings about the way things should be, and it's not a time necessarily to keep it to yourself, because things are changing, and you may very much be part of that change. Now, Mars is going into Libra, so you could say that the way you express yourself is changing. You're moving from a sort of a Virgo form of expression to a Libra type of expression, and that's quite possibly true. Many Arians are perhaps going to have to spend more time thinking about other people and making some effort to get them on your side and to understand what they're thinking and feeling. But I think that's something I'll be talking about more tomorrow. Taurus, you're able to see things in a fairly broad way if you give yourself a chance. You certainly don't want to be caught up in sort of mindless detail. I mean, that would be a shame. If you just focus on detail, on unconnected facts, then you're never going to get the big picture, are you? It's always nice to have secure facts, something is true, some little thing that is true. But how does it all connect? And lots of little facts on their own really don't amount to much. And so somehow, Taurus, you've got to try to make the connections and see the larger picture. And it may not always be easy, and you may be distracted because you're thinking too much about yourself and your subjective view of the world. and subjectivity can sometimes be a problem, and you're not the be all and end all. You're not the be all and end all, of course, and so try to get some perspective. I do think that that it really is important. Though on another level, many Taurians are going to want to be noticed. You don't want to just blend in. And the question is, how would you get noticed? And if you think about it, there is a way, but you have to think about it, and you have to plan it, and maybe you have to contrive it, create something out of nothing, and it may not be entirely natural. So it could be about what you wear, how you present yourself, even the things you say, or maybe the places in which you are seen. And so you are capable, if you really want, of being shocking, maybe even being artistically shocking or stylistically shocking, just doing something, wearing something that just makes you stand out. And it's not natural, it's not entirely natural, you will have to think about it, but you can reach the right conclusions, and that will allow you to put theory into practice. So in the end, Taurus, if you want to be outstanding, or if you want to stand out from a crowd, that's something that you will be able to do. And as far as other people are concerned, there is a change going on. Mars is changing sign. Mars is moving out of Virgo and into Libra, and with Mars moving into Libra, that could say something about the power equation, and not necessarily today, but over the next week or so, you may notice that your relationship with another person maybe undergoing a shift, and somehow something they're doing is making them lose power. And it's because Mars is moving into Libra. Mars is in its detriment in Libra, and this is happening at the same time as Venus is in Cancer, moving towards a conjunction of Jupiter. So you could say, over the next week, you are becoming more powerful and sort of more competent and perhaps more self-assured, whereas another person, perhaps someone you're in conflict with, there might be some rivalry there, and is getting weaker. But it could be that another person is getting weaker and needs your help. They're not so sure of themselves as Mars moves into Libra. So that's something that perhaps you should be thinking about. And going back to the moon in Capricorn, the moon is in Capricorn. It's making an opposition to Venus, and we should pay attention to that. So moon opposition Venus, that might highlight some of your weak spots. I mean, everyone has a weak spot, and traditionally one of the weak spots of a Taurus can be overindulgence. Now, it's not that every Taurus is overindulgent. You might say that if you've got a Taurian who has no indulgences, then watch out. That Taurian, could be dangerous. You might think of people like Robespierre or sort of Hitler. Hitler was a vegetarian teetotaler, wasn't he? What are your indulgences? And you need to make sure they don't get out of hand. That could happen with the Moon opposition Venus. In fact, with the Moon opposition Jupiter as well. Just getting involved in something, and you're happy getting involved in something, and you're not really thinking it through, and you're wasting a lot of time, and so that's just something you need to watch out for. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to happen, and it needn't happen, and so today overall Taurus does look interesting, and don't get caught on small irrelevant factual details. You do have to look at the bigger picture, and also do consider your appearance, because there are things you can do to change your appearance, to change your style, the whole way in which you come across. And it's also it's an aesthetic change, and you thinking about sort of art and beauty, and what looks good, what looks bad, and you can make that change, and in the end make an impact. Gemini. The moon is still in Capricorn, and so moon in Capricorn, it's not the best place for the moon to be in, certainly from a Gemini perspective. There are still going to be moments when you kind of feel that you're sort of you're in the wrong place, and you're not able to do what you want to do, not exactly. And part of the reason is that you have strong feelings, stronger than usual, and you're asking yourself a lot of questions. You may not be asking other people a lot of questions, but you're asking yourself a lot of questions, and so things just seem rather complex, and sort of more complex than you'd like them to be. And rather than complain about the situation, you should just possibly accept it. This is the way it is for the moment, and perhaps you've got some useful work to do. And the moon, when it's in Capricorn, is making oppositions to Venus and Jupiter, and those two oppositions, Gemini, might say something about money and your attitude to money, and how you respond to financial pressure. One way of looking at moon opposition Venus opposition Jupiter is about over expenditure. So that is a possibility, and in fact, Venus and Jupiter are forming this conjunction, which becomes exact on Monday. And while this Venus-Jupiter conjunction overall is great, I mean, it's one of the most fortunate aspects in the book, there's just a temptation, Gemini, that you might respond to the Venus-Jupiter conjunction by overcommitting yourself financially. And so today you might want to think very carefully about your various financial commitments, and what you're planning on doing over the next week. And if you're honest with yourself, you might accept that you may be on the verge of going too far, and that's not something you want to do, and it's unnecessary. Moon is in Capricorn. Moon in Capricorn is sensible. It's financially conservative, and so it's okay to be financially conservative. You mustn't worry about your image. Moon opposition Jupiter, it may be that you're encouraged by another person to overcommit, but if you trust your own judgment, then things should be okay. And while all this is going on, Mars is moving out of Virgo. And so I don't know when the moon moves into out of Virgo into Libra. It could be today if you're in the Americas. It could be tomorrow if you're if you're not. But Mars moving out of Virgo in general is probably a good thing. I mean Mars moving through Virgo from a Gemini perspective. There have been times when you've just been too focused on yourself and what's important to you, and trying to make sure that everything is safe and sound, and not maybe wanting to take risks. And over the last couple of months, you may have missed a few chances, a few opportunities, but now things are changing. Mars is moving into Libra, it's moving into an air sign, and we'll be starting to make a trine to Uranus, and that can sort of really remind you of of what you can do, and what kind of impression and impact you can have, and you can have a powerful impact. And at the same time, you'll have an opportunity to be yourself, and that really does matter. And finishing off with relationships. Relationships could be interesting today. Again, if you make the effort, and then the question is, will you make the effort? Mars is going to be in Virgo for most of the day, and perhaps all of the day if you're not in the Americas. So you might remain cautious, but if you're able to take a social initiative, or take many different social initiatives today and perhaps into tomorrow, you might see that things start to happen. There's a possibility that you can have interesting meetings that might be surprising. The various connections you're able to make could take an interesting turn. And this might also say something about the relationships you're already in. You shouldn't make assumptions about how anyone is going to behave, and you can get close to people in many different ways, and some of these ways might be quite surprising. And so do have an open mind when it comes to other people, and give it a go. Try to get on with people, even if the odds seem to be against you, because things might happen which bring you and someone else together. I mean, it could work the other way. So if you're having close connections with another person, and these connections have been in place for some time, then a turn of events might change things and create a new dimension, which at first might not feel great. It might be a threat to an existing relationship, but it's not a serious threat. It's just that you have to accept that other people are sort of fairly multidimensional, and you mustn't make assumptions about anyone and assume that they're going to behave in any particular way. And of course it works both ways. Hopefully other people won't make assumptions about you, and you in your own way are capable of being surprising. And so the more tolerant the atmosphere you're in, the environment you're working in, the better for everyone. Cancer. There continues to be some emphasis on relationships. It really can't be helped. The moon is in Capricorn. It's in your opposite sign, and while moving through Capricorn, it makes an oppositions to Venus and Jupiter. So what we have there is two oppositions across the main axis of your solar chart. Your main axis, solar chart might be your solar chart. If you're looking at this, your horoscope from a perspective of the sun, you may be coming into this looking at it from a perspective of your moon. It might be your lunar chart, and of course it might be your ascendant. So whatever chart you're using, whether you've got the sun in Cancer, moon in Cancer, or Cancer rising, you do have this these two oppositions across the main axis, and this says something about how you are able to relate. I mean, you have at the moment Venus and Jupiter moving through your sign, and so with Venus and Jupiter moving through your sign, moving towards a conjunction, by the way, this allows you to present yourself extremely well You can come over as being optimistic, happy, and socially very fluent. Now, moon opposition might be about mixed signals. Someone trying to be easygoing and relaxed and emotionally fluent, and someone else focusing on something completely different, perhaps focusing on their own selfish interests. So you've got a clash maybe between selfishness and selflessness, and a different set of priorities. And this might be a feature of your various relationships over the course of a day. You know, the people you meet, people having different priorities. One side looking after their own interests, the other side being sort of more charitable, being focused on, you know, the collective good. And the question is, which side are you on? And Cancerians are quite capable of being very selfish and being totally focused on their own interests. Absolutely. And it's possible that's you. And if that is you, if you are finding that you are putting your own interests first, that's fine, by the way, absolutely fine. Nothing wrong with that. But you have to make sure that you don't make it too obvious, that you somehow keep in mind general decorum and accepted behavior. And if you act impulsively to maybe try to sort out something that's bothering you, you know, worrying you, it'll be obvious to everyone. So some Cancerians may have to be very disciplined and not show their own selfishness, and you know, it can wait. In your own quiet way, at a later stage, you can make sure that your own interests, you know, are all in order. But I'm not saying that's going to be for every Cancerian. And it may be that today Cancerians are going to be split 50-50. 50% of Cancerians are going to be really selfish. And again, I'm not using selfish in a derogatory sense. Absolutely not. But so 50% of Cancerians are going to be really selfish, and 50% of Cancerians are going to be completely selfless. And so, you know, what kind of Cancerian are you? So that might be something that you really do need to think about. And, you know, ideally, you know, you will get the balance right, and you will recognize that your interests and other people's interests do actually concur. You know, there can be an agreement, and you can find, you know, a sense of balance, and you know, that way, you know, you'll be okay. And, you know, also just remember that your ability to get on with people and to create the right impression should, in theory, be quite good. As I've already said, with this Venus-Jupiter conjunction, it's just that moon opposition, the Venus-Jupiter conjunction, just creates some confusion, and there may just be moments where you reveal yourself in a way that may not be entirely fortunate. And another thing going on is that we've got Mars getting very close to the Libra point, 0 degrees Libra, and so, you know, Mars is that an important part of your chart? I mean, it's you know, you are a cardinal sign, Cancer. Mars is about to move into a cardinal sign, and with Mars getting ready to move from Virgo into Libra. In fact, today, if you're in the Americas, it will happen. Mars will move into Libra. you could realize that your own private interests do matter, and once Mars moves into Libra, your home and your family are probably going to take up more time than usual, and you will be thinking about what is important, and you don't want to get too obsessed. So that's something you need to think about, and I will be discussing in greater detail tomorrow what it really means for Mars to be in Libra. Leo, you know that something just has to be done. There is an expectation on you to take action, because maybe no one else will. Other people have their own priorities. They're doing things their own way, and they're not paying attention. But you, Leo, are in the spotlight, although you don't really want to be in the spotlight. You'd prefer to be just doing things quietly, away from outside attention, not being in the public gaze, but still you feel that action is required. There's something you have to do, and I'm not going to tell you what you need to do. I think that you have a pretty good idea, and your ability to make things happen is certainly very good. The sun is now 15 degrees Leo, right in the middle of the sign Leo, and you've also got Mercury in Leo, even though Mercury is retrograde. So we're right in the middle of Leo's season, and so the sun, of course the sun is in its own sign in Leo. So you have a chance to really do stuff, and to put yourself in a position where people pay attention to you, and it just might be that no one is saying anything except what has to be said, what has to be done, and you might just feel that it's a time where you have to set an example, and that raises the question, how do you go about doing it? It's not that you have to take dramatic action. You have to firstly say to yourself, well, there's an issue here, there's a problem, something needs to be said, and you're now going to go about the serious business of resolving it. And you can do this in a way that I would have said was fairly disciplined. So if you set yourself a set of clear tasks for the day, and you just go about them in a sort of in a way that is completely sort of methodical, then you will eventually get to where you want to go, and you will be in a position to really have an impact, and don't overdo it though, and there may be just times when you overdo it, and overdoing it can take many different dimensions. It can take different. There are different ways of overdoing it. One way of overdoing it is to just overload yourself, do too much work. But a few Leos, because the Moon is making an opposition to Venus and it is making an opposition to Jupiter, that could say something about secret pleasures, things you enjoy doing that you don't want other people to know about, and they're bad for you. They're not healthy, but you're kind of tempted, and maybe this is a particular issue, behind closed doors. You don't want people to know what you're doing, but there are temptations, and the question might be, well, to what extent do you give in to these temptations? I mean, I think that you can give in to temptations to some extent, but you don't want to run the risk of being, overindulgent, because if you are overindulgent today, that might have health implications. So today, if you eat or drink to excess, I mean, it's never a good idea to eat or drink to excess or do anything else to excess. But today there might be a particular cost. Maybe your bodily system is more vulnerable than usual to excess. So anything that is excessive or even runs the risk of being excessive should probably be avoided. And besides, Leo, I do think that you've got stuff to do, and if you're honest with yourself, you know that you've got stuff to do, and you know that somehow you've got to make an impression, because it's all about making the world a better place. And today that is very much something you can do. Virgo. Well, Mars is almost out of Virgo. In fact, if you're in the Americas, Mars does leave Virgo today. Well, late in the day, and it moves into Libra. And I think that is probably going to be a good thing. Mars has been in Virgo for some time. Was it a couple of months? And Mars has been close to the South Node, and many Virgos might have found themselves doing things that they just know they shouldn't have been doing. Putting energy maybe into the wrong things, into things that might actually be sort of quite self-destructive, and you just can't help yourself, or maybe you weren't able to help yourself, or just getting too worked up about things which really weren't worth the effort. And so you could have found yourself wasting a lot of time with Mars moving through Virgo. Of course, there were positive sides to Mars moving through Virgo. I mean, Mars is a very energizing planet, and so there could have been sort of bursts of energy, times when you could really accomplish a great deal, when you were able to, take on board, a lot of work and sort of cut through the detail and cut through the undergrowth, and work out a path for yourself, the right path. So it could have been constructive, but I think there are always dangers with Mars moving into Virgo, and so with Mars moving into Libra, that is possibly going to be a relief. It won't. It's not quite so compulsive for you, Mars in Libra. I mean, it does raise other challenges, and I will be talking about those challenges probably tomorrow. But one thing that you need to start to think about, perhaps you hadn't thought about so much, was money and how you assert yourself. It's all very well thinking about money, but how do you actually assert your financial interests, and how do you stand up for yourself? And that might be a question that you need to be thinking about, when Mars moves into Libra. But as far as today is concerned, it's not just that Mars is changing sign; it's also the fact that we've got the moon in Capricorn, and the moon in Capricorn. From your perspective, I would have regarded that as being a fortunate placement. I know that the moon is fallen in Capricorn, but that shouldn't really bother you. Moon in Capricorn is a time when you can start to explore what is important to you, and do things that you feel comfortable with, not what other people feel comfortable with. It's about what matters to you. And the moon in Capricorn does make opposition aspects to Venus and Jupiter, and those opposition aspects to Venus and Jupiter could represent external pressure. You being told that you should be doing something else, or someone else demanding attention or requesting that you do something you hadn't planned on doing. And it might seem straightforward. If someone makes a request, you give in to the request, you go somewhere, you listen to someone. Maybe you'll have a long phone call with someone, or you'll actually go and visit them. But I think there's a danger here that you lose sight of what is important to you, because it's you that matters today. It's not other people. Now, those other people might be friends. They might be people who you enjoy their company, and that looks great. But today, it's not a good idea, simply because you're missing an opportunity. And the real opportunity today, Virgo, it does lie with you. And it's your decisions that matter. And if you think that something is important and it's important to you, then it does matter that you're able to pursue it, in your own way. And so, don't allow yourself to be distracted by other people. Now, that doesn't mean that other people should be avoided. Other people can be interesting and they can be exciting. And if you make a special effort today, you can meet interesting people who've got something interesting to offer. But it's not about doing things their way. It's about variety. It's about social variety. And maybe you shouldn't be focusing on existing friendships. That might be kind of something from the past. And if someone knows you very well, it's very easy for them to have an influence on you. But if you're dealing with people you've never met before, or you hardly know them, and you try to talk to them and you listen to what they're saying, then there's a possibility of excitement and interesting and enlightening things happening. Libra. Mars is getting ready to move into your sign. In fact, if you're in the Americas, Mars is already sort of moving into your sign. Late in the day, Mars will be in Libra. And that is a very important sign change. And it is certainly energizing, and it allows you to do lots of different things, and it could make you powerful, provided you can handle the Mars energy in the right way. And with Mars getting ready to move into Libra, you should be looking very carefully at all of the people around you. Some of these people you might know well. Some of them they might be just on the fringes. You hardly notice them, but they're there. And it just could be that some people are moving onto center stage. Moving onto your center stage. And so it might be a good idea to think about who these people are. Some of these people might be good for you. They might be interesting and dynamic people who could make your life better, but other people could be a problem. Other people could sap your energy. And part of a problem of being a Libra, not every Libra, but this is a problem that some Librans have, is that they don't like to say no, and so they can sort of make commitments, and they can make too many commitments. They can even make commitments that are mutually exclusive. You cannot be in two places at once. That is simply impossible. But sometimes from a social perspective, some Librans do try. Can they get away with it? Well, I'm not sure. And so observe the developing social situation, because things are developing. And as far as today is concerned, perhaps you should observe it all from afar. You don't have to be right in the center of things. You can if possible, sort of be at a distance from the action. I'm not saying that's going to be easy. There is an opposition at the moment between the Moon and Venus, and also the Moon and Jupiter. Of course, Venus is your ruler, and this opposition does talk about the distinction between the public and the private. Yeah, part of you wants to be seen, wants to be heard, but on an emotional level, you may just prefer to keep something back. And the advantage of keeping something back is that you have some objectivity, and yeah, you can observe from a distance. And with relationships of all kinds, don't forget, this Mars moving into Libra is doubly important. It's not just because it's moving into Libra; it's because it's about to make an opposition to Saturn, and this opposition to Saturn, it just could be something you're already feeling, even though Mars may not have yet moved into Libra. And so Mars opposition Saturn can be about feeling very frustrated by the wrong kind of person. And so just do think who is good for you, who is life affirming, who is looking after your own best interests, and who is just a drag on your resources. Someone might just be dragging you down and preventing you from being yourself. And you are important, and you have to think about what contribution you can make. Now, it might be that today you do want to keep a low profile, and that would be fine, and it would be quite understandable. But some Librans want to make an effort. They want to be seen and be heard, and if you do that, you can certainly make an impression. It may not be 100% easy, and you may have to work on it, because your natural impulse today is to be a bit of an introvert. That's your natural impulse. But if you want to make the effort to be someone different, to really stand out, you absolutely can. There is a decile between Venus and Uranus. And so with this decile, 36 degrees apart, that is about working hard to create a certain impression. You know what impression you want to make. You have a clear idea about that impression. It's all about aesthetics. It's about what you look like. It's perhaps about beauty, about presentation. And you have an impression, you have an idea, and if you want to concentrate on that and really work on it, then you can create something. And it might feel fake, it might just be a mask, some sort of papier-mâché construction that isn't necessarily the real you. But does that matter? It's all about how people are seeing you, and you can change the way you are perceived, again, if you make the effort. Scorpio. Mars is getting ready to change signs. It's happening. And Mars is, of course, your ruler. And so, we really have to think about what this sign change means. And I'm probably going to spend time on this tomorrow in my horoscopes for Thursday. I mean, I really want to sort of get into what Mars in Libra means. Especially for some Scorpios, if you're a European Scorpio or an Asian or an Australasian Scorpio, Mars doesn't move into Scorpio, doesn't move into Libra today. It happens tomorrow. But Mars is certainly getting ready to change sign. And if you're in the Americas late in the day, Mars leaves Virgo and enters Libra. And so it may not be about the sign. Really, I mean, you can argue about what does it mean for Mars to be in Virgo or Mars to be in Libra, but the point is, it's just a sign change, and when you see a sign change, you see a change, and so it just could be that you're at a time when just the whole way you are expressing yourself is undergoing a transition, and perhaps you don't want to go as far as you have done in the past, and you might be of a view that some things should perhaps be just kept to yourself, and you've already given away too much. You've perhaps spent too much time in other people's company or listening to other people, and perhaps when you look at what's been going on in the last couple of months, there might have been a lot of time spent maybe listening to other people's nonsense, and that is not something you need. And also you have to be aware of your own weaknesses. We've all got weaknesses, and with Mars about to move into Libra, some of those weaknesses might become more apparent, and so you have to find a way of getting around those weaknesses. Though Mars being at 0 degrees Libra, or even just before 0 degrees Libra, Mars is on a cardinal point. It's opposition 0 degrees Aries. So I don't think there's anything especially weak about that. Mars on the Aries point, Mars opposition the Aries point. That does mean, like it or not, that there is a lot of attention on you. You may not want this attention. It's all too much, perhaps. But if you make the effort to concentrate on what is important and what is important to you, what you're passionate about, and also what annoys you, then other people have to listen. You have an audience. The audience, is definitely there, and so Scorpio, don't hold back. If you've got something to say, if you've got something to communicate, then now you can really get those words out into the open. You can get those ideas out into the open, and in general, Scorpio, your ability to communicate at the moment is pretty good, and you can just concentrate on the things that matter. Though don't feel that you have all the answers. It might be easier to feel that you've got all the answers, that you've just got a very straightforward approach to every problem. Here's the problem. It's like this. It's like this, and this, and the answer is obvious. Maybe it's not like that at all. So Scorpio, never forget that there are alternative views and alternative approaches. And it's not necessarily other people's alternative views. It's the universe telling you that there are alternatives. And you must be aware of those alternatives. And those alternatives are becoming clear, not least because Mars is on the Aries point. The Aries point, it's an interface. It's an interface between sort of you and the whole world and everything. And so those solutions, those ideas are all available if you can just make the effort to tune into them. And if you want to see the whole, and if you want to see the wider picture, it's important that you're objective. And I think when I was doing your horoscope for yesterday, I was mentioning this idea of objectivity, not getting caught up with things emotionally. And right now, you can let go of your ego, and you can realize that there are more important things. And by showing some objectivity, that you don't have your own agenda, then you're not just showing other people, you're showing the universe that you don't have an agenda, and that once you let go of your agenda, you can perhaps start to become aware of a larger agenda. And that larger agenda is perhaps about the collective good. And at the highest level, Scorpio, you can do things which do represent this collective good and can further it. Sagittarius. At the moment, Moon is moving through Capricorn. It's making an opposition to Jupiter. And that Moon-Jupiter opposition is likely to have an effect on you. I mean, after all, Jupiter is your ruler. It's in Cancer, and it's a time, Sagittarius, when hopefully you are tuning into the complications that are all around us. You're starting to understand that things aren't simple, and that there is a lot of work to be done. And this work has many forms, and part of that work it's emotional. It's how you feel about everything, and it's also the place where your emotions connect with everyone else's emotions. Maybe it's about the collective unconscious, and so you're making good progress here, and you're starting to perhaps feel the first benefits of Jupiter moving into Cancer, you becoming a sort of more serious, intense person, and you're not always telling people how you're feeling, but something is going on, and it's all for the good. But then the Moon comes along, makes an opposition to Jupiter, makes an opposition to Venus. I think that the Moon is not necessarily being very helpful. The Moon in Capricorn might represent something quite primitive, sort of primitive materialism. Maybe not your primitive materialism, maybe someone else's primitive materialism. Let's think about our own interests. Let's think about our own interests in the here and now. And it's all about the material world and making ourselves better off. And that's not the point. That if you focus on money for money's sake, financial benefit just for benefit's sake, that's not the right approach. But the pressure could be there with that Moon opposition Venus and Jupiter, and you might respond to it in different ways. You could ignore it, or you could just accept that pressure exists, and you accept it, but you say, well, that's not for you, and you're going to move on. Though for some Sagittarians, Moon opposition Jupiter, Moon opposition Venus, it just could be that you find yourself overcommitting financially, even though it's the wrong thing to do. You just might find yourself spending money on something that you don't need. You don't want to spend the money. You may even resent yourself spending the money, but you just feel you have to do it. And so, ask yourself what is necessary today. What do you need to sustain yourself? And anything beyond that is something that really should be avoided. And in particular with Moon opposition Jupiter and Venus, well, maybe you should avoid sort of unplanned expenditure. But you're dealing with an astrological event that could have different dimension. It could be the opposite. There may be moments today where you are uncharacteristically mean. You worry about a sum of money, for example, which is of no real significance. It's a tiny sum of money in the grand scheme of things. I mean, it really is a tiny sum of money. It's not about you thinking something is a tiny amount of money when it's actually a huge amount of money. It's something small, whatever, a few dollars, a few euros, whatever. It's neither here nor there. But you might decide to make it so significant that it becomes an issue, and that is not something, Sagittarius, that you want to do. Capricorn, at the moment, it may be quite easy to get distracted. You know what you should be doing today. It all seems in order, but as the day progresses, as things unfold, there may be things going on that perhaps you hadn't really thought about, and you hadn't taken them into consideration, and they take up a lot of your time, and they take up sort of more time than expected, and that may say something about other people. I mean, at the moment, we've got Moon opposition Venus, we've got Moon opposition Jupiter, and so that opposition, it's across an important axis of your chart, across the Capricorn Cancer chart. The Capricorn Cancer axis, and so there may be things really demanding your attention, and in a way that is rather selfish. People thinking that their needs are more important than your needs, and that you should drop everything and spend a lot of time looking after another person and their concerns, or it may just be a lot of time listening to someone, and that would be unfortunate. And additionally, it's a time when things that you thought you'd got over, perhaps temptations from the past had suddenly manifest. You might have thought you'd given up something long ago, but then sort of it crops up all over again, and so the past is not necessarily over, and so this might mean, Capricorn, that you have to show quite a high degree of self-discipline, and there are only so many hours in the day, and it's just possible to spoil your day by just taking the wrong path, and by listening to the wrong people. So decide, just decide what is important, and you don't want any sort of unscheduled diversions. And at the same time, while all this is happening, Mars is in very, very late Virgo. If you're in the Americas, Mars moves into Libra today, and this is a big deal, Mars moving into Libra, if you're a Capricorn, because Libra is a sign that is very high profile in your chart. Libra is a cardinal sign, Capricorn is a cardinal sign. So when Mars moves into Libra, that can be energizing, and it makes you want to put all of your energy into one particular thing, the thing that you find to be most important. And so I'm not saying that's going to be happening today, because even if you're in the Americas, Mars does move into Libra pretty late in the day. So Mars moving into Libra is more of a sort of a feature of tomorrow, and of course Mars stays in Libra for quite a long time, for 6 weeks or so, something like that, and so there is that change. And also Mars is opposition the cardinal, opposition the Aries point, and so you can feel the energy and you can feel that impulse. But just as far as today is concerned, there's just this possibility that you get distracted, and those distractions can take many forms. And looking at relationships, in general, it's a time when relationships are important, Capricorn, because Venus and Jupiter are in Cancer, Venus and Jupiter are in your opposite sign. We've got a Venus-Jupiter conjunction coming up on I think it's on Monday, and so there are plenty of opportunities to benefit from relationships over the next few weeks. But like today, it might just not be the right time to be allowing any one person to have too much influence on your life, because as I think I've already suggested, they could at best waste a lot of your time. At worst, they could take you down the wrong path, and that's not something you want to happen. Aquarius. I'm not convinced that today is going to be especially dramatic. It shouldn't be especially dramatic, and you certainly don't want to be chasing drama. That wouldn't be helpful. And in fact, Aquarius, there's some possibility that you get distracted distracted by things that aren't remotely helpful. And you have a curious streak, and if you see something interesting, you might want to ask questions about it, find out more, and as you find out more, you might get drawn into something, and as you get drawn into something, you stop asking questions, and before you know it, you're somewhere else, and you hadn't planned this thing, and it may not work out, and in certain cases it might actually be very damaging. So probably best, Aquarius, to just lay low and not allow yourself to be sort of knocked off the path. And I said something fairly similar to Capricorn, but Capricorn and Aquarius, they both have similarities in the sense that they're both ruled by Saturn. And so as far as your plans for today is concerned, the less you do, the better, or at least the less action you commit yourself to, the better. And you probably have a fairly clear idea about what you would like to do, or rather what you should be doing. And if you just pursue that goal, a very simple goal, something very straightforward, then you should be okay. Now, one thing that is happening today, or may be happening tomorrow, that is happening today if you're in the Americas, is Mars is changing sign. And Mars has been in Virgo for a couple of months, and Mars in Virgo hasn't been great. All things being equal, you have been sort of putting your energy into, I won't say the wrong things, but into things which were not always helpful. You could have been concentrating on maybe your own subjective feelings about a particular subject or a particular subjects, and when you tried to talk about it, it wasn't straightforward. And when you tried to initiate action, Mars is the action planet. When you tried to initiate action based on your feelings, it just might not have worked out. But Mars is changing sign. Mars is moving into Libra. Libra is an air sign, and so with Mars moving through Libra, things are going to get easier. And Mars will quite soon be making a trine to Uranus. Sorry, yes, it will be making a trine to Uranus. Let me clarify this. Mars will be making a trine to Uranus, and it will be making a trine to Pluto. So we've got the beginnings of a grand trine in air, and this grand trine in air could well affect the whole world. Three really quite sort of heavy planets, Uranus, Pluto, and Mars, all making this grand trine. I mean, I will be talking in detail about this grand trine probably later in the week. But as far as you're concerned, as far as you as an individual is concerned, I think that this grand trine could be something of a plus. Maybe that you finally, get your power back. Maybe you felt recently that you have lost some of your power, but with Mars moving into Libra, it really does energize you, and it allows you to go beyond your immediate situation, but in a way that's constructive. We're not talking about distractions. We're talking about something real and powerful, and that is something, Aquarius, for you to be looking forward to. Pisces. Mars is now in the last degree of Virgo. In fact, the last minutes of Virgo, getting ready to move into Libra. And if you're in the Americas, Mars will move into Libra later in the day. And so Mars moving through Virgo can be about other people and how you've related to other people, and perhaps you need to think now about what's happened over the last couple of months and how you've got on with other people and what kind of impact they've had on you. Has it been a fortunate impact, or have you been distracted, or maybe you put sort of too much effort into worrying about another person's interests. You haven't always put yourself first. And at the moment, Pisces, it is a time when you should be putting yourself first. The North Node is in Pisces; it's in your sign. The North Node is the way forward, and hopefully you have been moving forward since the North Node went into Pisces. I think that was sort of a couple of months ago, but there's been a strong temptation with Mars in Virgo in the sign opposite Pisces to be putting yourself second and other people first. But fortunately, it's nearly over. Mars is about to move into Libra, and I think that when Mars does move into Libra, you're going to perhaps find it easier to look after your own interests. And so that's something maybe to look forward to. I'm not saying that Mars in Libra is going to be entirely easy, because Mars in Libra has its own complications, and it can be quite serious, it can be quite intense, but I don't think it's anything that you can't handle. And as well as that, we've got the Moon in Capricorn. It's in Capricorn all day, and Moon in Capricorn on its own, from a Pisces perspective, is pretty good. I mean, Pisces and Capricorn have a good relationship to one another. These two signs have a sextile connection, and so it allows you to be yourself. It also means that from a social viewpoint, you can get attention. You can certainly fit in without too much effort. But the Moon is making an opposition to Venus and Jupiter today. And the opposition to Jupiter does matter, because Jupiter is your ruler. And so if you've got Moon opposition Jupiter, that lunar influence may not be entirely useful. The Moon may represent a distraction. The Moon is this fast-moving body. It's easy to get caught up in it, and of course now the moon is approaching fullness, isn't it? It's getting quite sort of larger and larger in the sky, and we can get distracted by it. And so the contrast might be between on one hand your social life and what people are saying and what people are suggesting, and on the other hand, what's important to you. Jupiter in Cancer, in fact Venus moving to a conjunction of Jupiter in Cancer. Venus and Jupiter are two planets that have a special relationship with Pisces. Jupiter rules Pisces, Venus is exalted in Pisces. They're moving towards a conjunction with each other, and this is a very fortunate event. I mean, this conjunction is exact on Monday, but the Moon is almost trying to sabotage it. And if you listen too much to other people, then you might be spoiling your own luck, and you have your own ideas about what you should be doing, over the next week, and perhaps other people have other ideas. And if you do things other people's way, then that could have a cost. And while you're busy looking after another person's interests, an opportunity might be passing you by, and that opportunity could be about you working on yourself, you preparing for that Venus-Jupiter conjunction, which is coming up soon enough. So Pisces, do think about what matters, and with Mars moving out of Virgo into Libra, and that Moon opposition Jupiter and Venus, it is a time to be putting yourself first. And if you do that, you don't feel guilty about it. It's absolutely the right thing to do. And now I want to switch to the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Wednesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 61, which is inner truth. Now, this is a very balanced hexagram. You can see at the heart of this hexagram is emptiness. And that emptiness represents our own openness to possibilities and also to the truth itself. We haven't got all the answers. We might think we've got all the answers, but none of us have. And so by keeping a place empty for other possibilities, for the real truth, we might have our own fake truth, or we might have got a temporary truth, but it might not be the real thing. And so, open-mindedness really does matter, with this hexagram. And so, this hexagram is about seeing the truth, and it can be very difficult to get people to see this truth. And it can happen now with inner truth. We can get through to people. Finally, in the past, it might have been impossible, but now we can do it. The Wilhelm translation of the I Ching, talks about pigs and fishes, and it sees pigs and fishes as these animals that are very stubborn. They do their own thing, and it's saying, even pigs and fishes can understand the truth. So that might be us explaining something for the 50th time, and finally we get our message across. Or it could be about us understanding the truth. We have perhaps been in denial. We just haven't seen it. We've seen it, but we haven't taken it on board. But finally the penny drops, and so that really does matter. Now we have the bottom line moving, and with this bottom line moving, it's very important to be self-contained, and we need to be comfortable in ourselves and be comfortable in our own truth. And it's not about relying on anyone else. We might think that someone else might tell us what the answer is, but that's not the case. The truth has to be worked out by us on our own. Other people might be convincing, but they don't have the answer. And I think this is a reminder that the truth has a subjective element. We all have our own different truths, and today we can discover the truth that matters for us. And the I Ching does tell us, if we rely on other people, then potentially that reduces the truth. I mean, in an extreme situation, that could lead to lies. And so self-sufficiency really does matter. Now, got a moving line, and that means that the inner truth does move to a second hexagram, and the hexagram it moves to is hexagram 59, which is dispersion. And this hexagram is about the floods. It's about rain. It's about everything being cleared away. And that sounds problematic, but it's not problematic. It's a good thing. There's a lot of clutter from the past, and if we want to get to the truth, the inner truth, we've got to clear that clutter away, and it's going to happen. And so the rains come. I mean, not necessarily the literal rains, but the storm comes, there's water everywhere, everything gets washed away. And there may be moments where we feel that we're under a lot of threat, that the storm is not finishing, that we're getting thrown around like being trapped in a washing machine. But we get through. And when the storm finishes, we find we're somewhere else. It's like the storm has moved us on, and it's actually moved us further on our path. And so that's what happens when you find the truth, when you find your truth. It can lead to a storm, and you have to sort of abandon old concepts, perhaps even abandon sort of friendships, relationships, everything that is just no longer important, that is fake. And so, in the end, it's good, and it's a dramatic process, but we are better people for it. And now I want to look at Hiroshima and astrology. And the Hiroshima chart, as I said at the beginning, is the most important chart there is, as far as I'm concerned. This is my truth. It's not your truth, but it's my truth. And it does link with the question of, why does one study astrology? Or rather, why do I study astrology? Well, there are different reasons that I study astrology, or indeed, why do I practice astrology, and why is astrology important to me? And so astrology, we might see astrology as being a way of understanding oneself. You set up your chart, and we have things going on in our life, perhaps things going wrong with our life, and we want to understand why. And so you could say that astrology is like a language. If I don't know why I'm doing what I do, but then I know that I've got a Saturn-Neptune square in my horoscope, well, that makes sense. I mean, it allows me to get a perspective on my personality. And additionally, it might make events clearer, because that leads into another use of astrology, and that's for predicting the future. And we all want to know what's going to happen next at some level. Obviously, we would prefer it if we get good news, if things look good for us. For example, there's on Monday there's a Venus-Jupiter conjunction at 1314 Cancer. My IC is at 1314 Cancer, and I'm just wondering, what is that Venus-Jupiter conjunction going to be about? I'm not gonna move. That's not going to happen, because IC is about where you live. That's is not going to happen. I mean, I could drop dead. I mean, that is possible with Venus-Jupiter conjunction. The IC is the end of the matter, so that could be a manifestation. But I'm just interested in to see how this Venus-Jupiter conjunction is going to work. I suspect absolutely nothing is going to happen. That's a problem with astrology. You get excited about something, and you think, this is what's it going to do, and then absolutely nothing happens at all. So that is a problem with astrology, and it is a problem with using astrology to make predictions. Of course, it's not just about making predictions. It can be about events in the past. We look at an event, something that's happened to us. Perhaps it was a really dramatic, life-changing event, but we still haven't got over, even though it's decades ago. But we want to know what was going on astrologically, what transits, what directions, did we have an interesting solar return? And so that might help us sort of make sense of it all. But for me, that's not what astrology is about. Okay, it is what astrology is about, but it's not the most important thing about astrology. And but this does link to the Hiroshima chart in the end. And, for me, I want to believe. I do. I want to believe. I want to, I'll be honest, I want to believe that there is a God. I want to believe that there is an afterlife. I do. I mean, that sounds kind of childish, but I'll be honest, that's what I would like to believe. And there is a problem that there is no evidence. I mean, not evidence that I can see. You have these events, and human beings are incredible. They're real meaning machines. We can create meaning out of everything, and coincidences, and that's what humans do. But I'm not really a faith kind of person. Faith is not really my thing. I find faith. I've had faith in the past, but I wouldn't have said faith is a very motivating thing for me. And from a sort of a biblical perspective, perhaps the character in the Bible that sort of I most sort of relate to is Thomas. Thomas Didymus. Of course, Didymus I believe is the Greek for the twin. So there is a sort of a Gemini connection there with Thomas Didymus. I mean, I'm sure it's just a coincidence, but he was the one that did not believe that Christ had been resurrected. He had to sort of put his fingers, I think, or in Christ's wounds to really show that something had happened, and that was the moment. So Thomas didn't have faith, and hence the doubting Thomas. So the concept of the doubting Thomas is something that I can very much relate to. Now, as far as astrology is concerned, people have tried to use statistics to demonstrate that astrology works, and this is a fool's errand. And for the first 10 years of being in America, when I emigrated to America, sort of 2011, and I spent 10 years more for that. Well, what was I doing? What was my main activity? My main activity was tutoring statistics. I mean, I have a couple of degrees in psychology. I learned some statistics there, and I tutored statistics. I did a lot of statistics. And so the statistical way of viewing things, I'm not a mathematician. I'm not into sort of serious sort of calculus-based statistics, all of that kind of thing. But, I know the basics of statistics. And so I know that there is not a shred of statistical evidence that astrology works. Okay, you think, well, what about Michel Gauguin? Well, Michel Gauguin, there are problems with the Gauguin data, and Michel Gauguin might have found the Mars effect, but one of the criticisms that Gauguin faced was he potentially fell for the multiple comparison effect, because he was doing all sorts of statistical tests, and whenever you do a statistical test, there's always a probability that there's always a chance that you'll erroneously find an effect. And I think that's what happened with Gauguin. He tested things so many times that it was almost inevitable that he was going to find statistical significance. I mean, there is a counter argument that even then the Mars effect was working to some extent, but the evidence is not great, and also it does seem that with the Gauguin data that it doesn't work for, I believe it doesn't work for people born by caesarean section, which is another problem with the Gauguin data. So how can you possibly accept that anything works? And astrology, why am I wasting my time with astrology? And this brings me on to the Hiroshima chart, and indeed to the whole sort of astrology of the nuclear program, because it is really very interesting. So I'm not going to actually start with the Hiroshima chart, although the Hiroshima chart is the chart. It is the most beautiful chart that I've ever seen. So let's let's start with a chart of the isolation of plutonium. I mean, this is a chart I like because we're looking for real concrete evidence that astrology works, and we can't use statistics. I mean, statistics is not going to help. I've tried, honestly. I mean, okay, there may be people who've Gogol's tried even more, and he didn't just not get the recognition he felt he deserved, but he potentially had made some mistakes. So let's look at the chart for the isolation of plutonium. So plutonium was isolated on December the 14th, 1940 at 8 p.m. And at the time of plutonium's isolation, so that's why you had a test tube or whatever they did to isolate plutonium, and suddenly these bits of plutonium, I don't know quite how it worked, but this is when plutonium became a thing. And Pluto was at 4 degrees Leo when Pluto was at 4 degrees Leo at that time. And Pluto had just been discovered. Pluto had been discovered 10 years earlier. And of course, we naturally make an association between Pluto and plutonium because Pluto rules plutonium. I mean, that's obvious. But does it really rule plutonium? Well, yes, it does rule plutonium. And we can see from this chart that it rules plutonium because Pluto was almost exactly on the ascendant when plutonium was isolated. And that is a great chart, isn't it? I mean, it's simple. You see, it's a simple signature here. We don't have to look at anything in this chart except for Pluto. Pluto rising, Pluto emerging, Pluto coming into consciousness, Pluto being isolated. And if we were to look at other stuff, if we were to throw asteroids into that chart or something else, other points, we would in a way be weakening the chart. Just keep it simple. And that's just so important because if you keep it simple, you keep the magic going. And it is about magic. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the magic in astrology. And, plutonium was, of course, the element that was used in the first atomic bomb. The first atomic bomb was not a uranium bomb. I mean, we associate uranium with the nuclear program, but it was in fact it was a plutonium bomb. So the first nuclear explosion on July the 16th, 1945, at I think 5:29:21 a.m. Has Saturn rising. It's a serious event. Just before dawn, just before the sun rose. Saturn rose first, and that was the time when you had the explosion. I don't know exactly when Saturn would have when Saturn exactly rose on that day. So when the body of Saturn rose on 5:37:46. So 46. So about 6 minutes after the explosion, the body of Saturn rose. And Mars is interesting because Mars is conjunct Algol, quite closely conjunct Algol, I think. So if we look at the fixed stars, Algol is this planet of sort of evil. So Mars was 11 arc minutes from being conjunct Algol, and as we will see, that is potentially a theme of nuclear explosions. And so Charon is on the IC. But this chart, although it was a huge event, it's not such a dramatic chart. I think that it doesn't have any real magic, this chart. We don't have obvious signatures in this chart, as far as I can see. And okay, it's nice that Mars is on Algol. It's nice that Saturn is rising, and of course, Mars on Algol. If you look at India's first nuclear explosion on May the 18th, 1974, they called it sort of the smiling Buddha. That was the name of the operation, the explosion, and the Sun was conjunct Algol. So maybe there it is. The Sun was at 26 Taurus. You also had Saturn. Rising at the time of this explosion. In fact, you can see that Saturn was in Cancer. So Saturn was at 2 degrees 55 Cancer on May the 18th, 1974, and so it was just before it came into prominence. So there's a sort of a link up there between America's first nuclear explosion in 1945 and sort of 29 years later. So it's almost like the Saturn return of the nuclear bomb sort of relates to the smiling Buddha, to India's first test. But then there is Hiroshima, and the Hiroshima horoscope. So this is a chart for when the bomb was released. I think it was at 8:15:15, and what you have to remember about this chart, about Hiroshima chart, is that unlike the first nuclear explosion in July of 1945, this was a uranium bomb. It was not a plutonium bomb. A uranium bomb is much more straightforward. It doesn't use an implosion. It has a sort of a gun method where one piece of uranium is fired into a bigger piece of uranium and you get critical mass and it explodes. So it's a much more straightforward thing. And so the planet that rules uranium is obviously Uranus. And you could look at this chart and strip away every single planet. You could just make it all disappear. The only planet that matters is Uranus, you could argue. And Uranus was at the time of leaving the plane, Uranus was at 16 degrees 29 Gemini, and at the midheaven was at 16 degrees 34 Gemini. So in other words, it was that exact moment where Uranus culminated was when the bomb was released. I think it was 31,000 feet above Hiroshima. And so we get further symbolism here. We have the top of the chart, that plane 31,000 feet up, drops the bomb, and it is a uranium bomb. And so you've got Uranus on the midheaven, and it's as simple as that. You don't have to look at anything else. And that is why I find this chart so beautiful. Nothing else in that chart matters. I mean, there is stuff in that chart that is really significant that we can look at, but nothing else matters. And I don't have to worry about statistics or whatever, unless the United States Air Force or whoever planned the atomic bombing of Hiroshima used astrology. They thought, well, we know that Uranus is going to be on the midheaven at 8:15, and we want this to be successful, and we know that Uranus is the ruler of uranium, and it's a uranium bomb, and so it was all worked out beforehand, and they had an astrologer working on the team. Is that likely? I think that didn't happen. So, because it didn't happen, we can say that it was a natural event, and it doesn't matter what other charts you show. It doesn't matter however many charts you have which aren't showing that astrology works, however many duff charts you have. This chart just stands out because it was, in some respects, the most important event in the 20th century, or certainly in the top 5 most important events in the 20th century. An atomic bomb was used against a civilian target for the first time. At least 90,000 people were killed. It was an absolutely devastating event, and it's difficult to find a more significant event. Okay, the first nuclear test in July, the previous July, could be that significant. I mean, it was the first time that it was shown that the nuclear device would work, but this was when it was used as a weapon. And yeah, one bomb killed 90,000 people, and possibly more, possibly up to 160,000 people. So that's all you need. That's all you need to look at. And to me, that is, not just evidence; it is a demonstration that astrology works. And even though I'm not convinced by statistics, I don't have faith. Faith is not something I'm into. And of course, if astrology works, then a lot of other things are possible. We can start to think about collective processes. And if you think about collective processes, what do you think? Well, maybe another process that may be working is something involving some higher being or God. And then there's a possibility that maybe this life is not the end. Maybe I can reincarnate, or maybe my death is not, maybe I'll come back, and maybe there is an afterlife. And so that's why Hiroshima is very important to me. Now, my logic might seem incredibly childish to you, but then you could argue that religion and thoughts about coming back after one's dead are childish. But that's just me. I have to be honest, about who I am and my rather simplistic view of the world. So Hiroshima does matter. Now you can look in further detail at this chart, and you can see that, for example, the moon is exactly conjunct Saturn. The moon was at 3 degrees Cancer. Saturn was at 1813 Cancer. So they were exact Moon-Saturn conjunction. No orb. If you're into the United States chart, well, of course, you can see that there's a Mars-Uranus conjunction, and of course, the United States came into being at the time of a wide Mars-Uranus conjunction in 1776, and you can look at the midpoints. So if you look at the midpoints, if we do the 90-degree dial for Hiroshima, and we put Uranus if we put Uranus on the pointer, then Uranus at that time was on the Sun-Moon midpoint. It was also on the ascendant midheaven midpoint. So it wasn't exactly on the ascendant midheaven midpoint, and it wasn't exactly on the Sun-Moon midpoint. But the ascendant midheaven and the Sun-Moon midpoint, they are the two most important midpoints, and Uranus was on those midpoints. And additionally, remember, there was a Moon-Saturn conjunction at the time of the Hiroshima explosion. And so the Moon-Saturn conjunction and the Sun-Saturn midpoint and the Sun-Moon midpoint. So there was a symmetry between, on one hand, the Moon-Saturn conjunction, on the other hand, the Sun, and what created that symmetry, the axis of symmetry was that Uranus midheaven midpoint. So overall, I regard the bombing of Hiroshima as its chart as just being absolutely incredible. It's an incredibly simple chart, and again, you only have to look at Uranus. I mean, that's the only planet that mattered. And it's clearly a demonstration that Uranus works, and that Uranus is the ruler of that Uranus rules uranium, and we can just let's just make this chart how it needs to be. And we can reduce it. Let's finally remove Black Moon Lilith, if I can. There you go. And that's it. That's a chart we needed to look at. That's all there is. Uranus on the midheaven. And it just describes the event perfectly. And to me, that is a clear proof that astrology works. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say on Hiroshima. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description. And I will talk to you again tomorrow.